I arrived earlier than usual that day, even though I knew what was waiting for me. The summer heat in New York had not yet reached its peak, so the morning air felt crisp against my skin as I stood across the street from the tall glass tower that housed Neuralink Solutions. From the outside, the building always looked like a monument to innovation. Sunlight bounced off the mirrored windows, dazzling and cold at the same time, reflecting the city that pulsed around it. Inside those walls, fortunes were made and destroyed with every new algorithm, every fresh pitch to investors, every contract signed with a shaky pen. I stood for a moment on the corner, watching the flow of employees hurrying inside with paper cups of coffee and digital tablets clutched against their chests. Some of them were interns, eager and hopeful, their lanyards bouncing against their shirts. Others were veterans of the company, moving with the weary steps of people who had already seen too many reorganizations and too many promises that never delivered. I had once been one of the eager ones. Not anymore. Today, I was the name at the top of the list in a meeting that no one wanted to attend. The security guard at the entrance, a man named Joe who had once helped me carry a heavy box of servers up to the 13th floor, nodded at me politely. He did not know what was about to happen, or maybe he did, and simply decided not to show it. My badge beeped green when I tapped it against the reader. That tiny flash of light had always been an invitation, but this time I knew it was a farewell. I smiled faintly, almost like I was acknowledging a private joke that no one else could hear. The lobby smelled of polished marble and burnt espresso. The air conditioning hummed softly, chilling the sweat that had collected at the back of my neck during my walk from the subway. A cluster of junior analysts passed me, talking nervously about an upcoming presentation. They looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and deference. I was still the lead systems engineer in their eyes. They had no idea that in less than an hour I would officially be nothing. Or so they thought. The elevator ride to the 22nd floor felt longer than usual. Each ding of the passing floors echoed inside the metallic walls. I studied my own reflection in the polished doors. My charcoal blazer was perfectly pressed. My hair was tied back tightly, not a strand out of place. My eyes, however, gave away nothing. Calm, steady, unreadable, I had trained myself for this moment. Fear was an indulgence I could not afford. Conference Room B was at the far end of the corridor. Everyone in the company knew what that room meant. It was the execution chamber. I had walked past it countless times, watching others step inside and then emerge later with a cardboard box in their arms and despair in their eyes. Today it was my turn. I pushed the door open. The room was bathed in morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sun was deliberately positioned behind the executives, shining directly into the seat that had been reserved for me. They wanted me blinded, disoriented, on the defensive from the very beginning. Richard Hale, the CEO who had been installed less than a year ago, sat at the head of the table. He looked like a man who had never truly built anything in his life, only bought and sold the efforts of others. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, his teeth gleaming with the kind of whiteness that money could buy. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Please sit, Kylie." I placed my phone face down on the table before taking the seat. A small gesture, almost unnoticeable, but deliberate. I glanced at my watch. They thought I was anxious, fidgeting. In truth, I was marking time. To Richard's left sat Marcia from HR, clutching a folder so tightly that the edges were beginning to curl. Her lips were pressed together in that practiced line of sympathy that HR professionals wore like armor. To Richard's right was a man I did not recognize, probably legal counsel, judging by the sleek suit and the expensive pen he tapped rhythmically against the table. He avoided my eyes as if direct contact might compromise his objectivity. Richard leaned forward, his tone rehearsed. "Kylie, we need to discuss some concerning patterns in your recent work. Unauthorized access to sensitive systems. Activities beyond your approved scope. Downloading proprietary data to personal devices." The words were heavy, deliberate, chosen to intimidate, but I had heard them in my mind many times already. I let my face shift just enough to show shock. My eyes widened, my lips parted, a soft intake of breath. It was a performance, but a convincing one. I whispered, "I do not understand. Everything I accessed was within my responsibilities as lead systems engineer." Richard cut me off smoothly. "The NeuroBridge project is no longer your concern. Effective immediately, your employment with Neuralink Solutions is terminated." Marcia slid the folder across the table with shaking fingers. The sound of the cardboard scraping against the wood was louder than it should have been. I reached for it with hands that trembled slightly, another calculated gesture. They thought I was breaking. They wanted to see me crumble. Instead, every second they spoke was another second that my carefully prepared plan advanced. "This is a mistake," I said quietly. My voice caught, breaking at the right moment. It was not a lie. It was a mistake, just not mine. The legal counsel finally spoke, his voice cold and clipped. "Any attempt to access company systems or contact clients will result in immediate legal action." I looked past them, through the glass wall. 2 security guards were approaching. Mark and Daniel. I had known them for years. They had once carried pizzas with me during late-night deployments, joked about sports while we waited for code to compile. They were good men, and I felt a pang of guilt knowing they would soon be unwilling players in this drama. "Can I at least know why?" I asked softly, though the question was rhetorical. Richard's eyes softened with the false sympathy of a man who wanted to look merciful. "The board feels new leadership is required for the Neuro Bridge initiative. Tyler has demonstrated remarkable vision in improving your original designs." Tyler, my former intern, the one who once asked me if a recursive function was the same as a while loop. The one who had stumbled over basic data structures until I spent hours teaching him. Now he was their chosen visionary, their puppet star. I forced a small smile. "I see. I suppose I should thank you for the learning experience." Richard smiled back, all teeth and no warmth. "We wish you the best in your future endeavors." Mark touched my elbow gently, guiding me up from the chair. His touch was kind, almost apologetic. I gathered my belongings slowly, deliberately. The world's okayest engineer mug someone had given me as a joke. A small succulent that had survived countless weekends without water. A photo of my niece, her smile reminding me of why I had kept going through the endless nights of code. I left behind the laptop, the branded hoodie, the meaningless plaques. They no longer mattered. Mark muttered, "I am sorry, Kylie. You were always decent to us." "It is just business," I replied, and for once those words rang with truth. The walk through the open office was silent. Some of my colleagues avoided my eyes. Others gave me looks of pity mixed with relief that it was me and not them. They had no idea that in just a few minutes their monitors would begin to flash with warnings, their systems would choke on the absence of licenses they did not own. The elevator descended slowly. I watched my reflection in the polished steel doors. Calm, composed, unshaken. I had prepared for this. Fear had no place here. When we reached the lobby, I checked my watch once more. 8:47 a.m. exactly on time. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. Just one vibration, one notification. A single green checkmark emoji. Nothing more. It was enough. The cascade had begun. The buzz of my phone lingered in my pocket as the security gates opened with a dull beep. Mark handed over my deactivated badge with the gentle finality of a man closing a door that would not open again. The badge no longer held any power, but the vibration in my pocket did. A single green check mark on my screen. To anyone else it would have looked meaningless, but to me it was the sound of a lock turning, the signal that months of preparation had just come alive. I stepped outside into the bright New York morning. The sky was a piercing blue, the kind of blue that usually made me want to breathe deeper, but today it felt like the sharp edge of a blade slicing the city open. I paused for a moment on the plaza steps and looked back at the glass tower. It loomed above me, glittering with the arrogance of a company that thought it could erase me. Inside, Richard and his boardroom allies probably believed they had won. In reality, the countdown had already started. The cafe across the street had been my quiet refuge for years. It was where I sketched the first architecture of Neuro Bridge on a napkin stained with espresso, back when everything felt possible and betrayal had not yet poisoned the air. The barista recognized me instantly and gave me a polite smile. I ordered a cortado, my ritual drink, and carried it to the window seat. From there, I could see directly into the front of the Neurolink offices, a perfect vantage point. The first sign of trouble would not be visible to anyone outside. It would start in the server rooms buried beneath the building, in the silent hum of racks that processed millions of neural signal interpretations every second. My script had been watching patiently for one condition only, the deactivation of my credentials. When it detected the change, it did not scream or slam doors. It moved with precision. Step 1. File the patent applications. I had preloaded 47 of them, each documenting algorithms I had built long before the company signed me on full-time. Each application included timestamps, logs, even video records of me coding into the night on my personal laptop. Within seconds, confirmation emails would arrive, each stamped with the authority of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Step 2. Notify the network. A curated list of former colleagues, industry journalists, and early angel investors would receive polite, carefully worded messages. The subject lines were neutral but intriguing: new licensing opportunities available. Inside each email was proof of ownership, legal documentation, and an invitation to discuss potential partnerships with my new company, Athenes Labs. Step 3. Flip the switch inside Neuralink itself. Every system that relied on my algorithms was designed to continue running as long as my credentials remained valid. The moment those credentials vanished, the systems recognized the change as an expired license. They did not shut down instantly. They simply froze. No new builds, no updates, no redeployments. The error message was simple, brutal, and legally watertight. License verification failed. Please contact Athenes Labs. I took my first sip of coffee. The cortado was perfectly balanced, warm milk cutting the sharpness of the espresso. Across the street, the first movements began. A junior engineer ran from one floor to another, clutching a laptop with both hands. Someone else leaned over a desk, gesturing wildly. The calm rhythm of morning routines was breaking. I smiled faintly. 4 minutes since my termination. Right on schedule. The satisfaction was not about revenge, though I would be lying if I said the site did not please me. It was about justice. They had stolen my name, erased my contributions, handed my work to a man who could not even explain it. They believed I would walk away quietly, another casualty of corporate politics. Instead, I had rewritten the script. As the chaos unfolded across the street, memories seeped in, vivid and sharp. I remembered the night 3 months earlier when insomnia had dragged me out of bed at 3 in the morning. I had opened my laptop and reviewed the original contract I signed as a contractor. The words glared at me: all intellectual property developed using company resources during assigned work hours belongs to Neuralink Solutions. At first, I had cursed myself for not reading more carefully. Then I read again, and again. My pulse quickened: using company resources, during assigned work hours. Most of the NeuroBridge Foundation had been built before I was ever an employee, on my personal laptop, on nights and weekends. I called Laura, the attorney I had met at a tech law panel. She answered groggily, asking if I knew what time it was. I told her I found it. The loophole. Silence stretched across the line. Then her voice sharpened. I am listening. By dawn, we had mapped the implications. Every algorithm coded in my apartment, every model trained on my own hardware, every log and every live stream I had foolishly shared with a small community of AI researchers, it all belonged to me. Not the company, me. Laura's laugh had been low and predatory. They think they are erasing you. They have no idea they are documenting their own theft. That was when the plan was born. Back in the present, the plan was now alive. The fail-safe did not just protect me. It forced recognition. Neuralink could no longer hide my work behind Tyler's polished presentations. The system itself acknowledged me. Every error message carried my company's name. Every line of halted code pointed back to me. Across the street, more figures clustered near the windows. A man in a suit spoke urgently into his phone, pacing with rapid steps. I imagined the DevOps team struggling to explain to him why the build pipeline was failing. They would try to restart. They would try to patch. But the message would not change. License expired. Contact Athenes Labs. My phone buzzed. The first confirmation email from the patent office appeared on the screen. Then another, and another. Each one a nail in the coffin of Neuralink's illusion of ownership. Another buzz. A reply from Michael Reeves, a former colleague now at Microsoft. Very interested. When can we schedule a call? I leaned back against the cafe chair, letting the sun warm my face through the window. Around me, the morning crowd sipped their lattes and tapped at laptops, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the building across the street. To them, I was just another woman enjoying her coffee. They could not see the storm spreading through the corporate hive on the other side of the glass. The truth was, I had designed the storm to look like an accident. That was the beauty of it. I had not hacked anything. I had not stolen data. I had simply reclaimed what was legally mine. My code was the foundation, my algorithms the skeleton of every system. Without the license they had unwittingly acknowledged in signed documents, those systems could run but not evolve. They were frozen in amber, alive but lifeless. A group of executives appeared suddenly in the lobby. I recognized one of them as Samuel Torres, the vice president of engineering who had once championed my work before falling silent when Richard took over. His face was pale, his gestures frantic. He barked instructions into his phone, then stormed back toward the elevators. The crisis was climbing. I took another sip of coffee and let myself smile. It was working. The irony was almost poetic. They had always accused me of being too technical, too obsessed with details, too focused on logs and documentation. Yet it was precisely those details, those logs, those endless hours of meticulous record-keeping that had given me the power to dismantle their empire with a single green checkmark. For years, I had documented everything because I believed in transparency, in science, in reproducibility. I had live-streamed my coding sessions for a small online community because I thought knowledge should be shared. At the time, it felt naive, maybe even foolish. But now those choices had become unshakable evidence. Neuralink could scream sabotage all they wanted. The paper trail said otherwise. I thought of Richard, probably pacing in his office at that very moment, phone buzzing constantly with investors demanding explanations. I wondered if he remembered signing the 200-page technical document I had placed in front of him one Friday afternoon. Page 172, buried in the middle of compliance charts and schema diagrams, held a single sentence that changed everything. Core algorithmic foundations developed by Kylie Kelly prior to full employment remain the intellectual property of the developer, licensed under terms to be renegotiated. He had signed without reading, his pen moving swiftly as his mind was already on the golf course. That signature was my shield, my sword, and my triumph. The cafe was filling up now. College students with backpacks, freelancers hunched over laptops, a mother calming her restless toddler with a muffin. None of them knew that just a few feet away across the street, millions of dollars of corporate value were evaporating by the second. My phone buzzed again. Another investor reply, another journalist request. The network was reacting fast. The story was already escaping the walls of Neuralink and spreading like wildfire through the city. I set my cup down slowly and looked out the window again. The ant farm was in chaos. They had removed me at 8:30. By 8:47, I had taken everything back. And this was only the beginning. I stayed by the window in the cafe long enough to watch the first wave of panic rise through the glass tower. Then I turned my eyes to the notebook in front of me and let the pen hover above a blank page. I was not going to write the story of what they were doing to me. I was going to write the story of what I had done to protect myself. The difference mattered. People like Richard always believed that power lived in boardrooms and investor calls. I learned a long time ago that power lives in the places where attention is weakest. It lives in audit logs at 2 in the morning. It lives in page 172 of a document no one wants to read. It lives in the moments when everyone else is looking at slides while you are looking at the words under the slides. The memory that returned first was not dramatic. It was the taste of instant noodles at midnight, the soft whir of my personal laptop, the buzzing light bulb above my small kitchen table. That was where I drew the first map of NeuroBridge 2 years before the first investor ever heard its name. I remember sketching the pipeline on a scrap of paper. Sensor signals, pre-processing, neural mapping, adaptive response. I talked to myself as I wrote, half from focus and half because the apartment felt too quiet. The city hummed outside my window and I felt like I was tapping into its rhythm. Back then I believed that if I did the work, credit would follow. I was not naive. I had seen other people get erased. I thought I would be different because I kept proof. My proof was obsessive and absolute. I saved logs for everything. I kept a private repository for my drafts and a public diary where I wrote technical entries about obstacles and solutions with dates and times. I even recorded some late-night coding sessions and streamed them to a small group of researchers because I loved the feeling of speaking to people who understood. There were only a few of them, scattered across other cities, polite and curious and brilliant. We did not share secrets. We shared approaches. There is a difference. When Neuralink brought me on as a contractor, I was proud. I was paid little at first, and I did not care. The idea lived. The first place where my idea had a room of its own was a tiny conference room with a whiteboard that squeaked and a view of a brick wall. I did not even have a badge then. I signed in at the lobby as a guest and smiled at the receptionist as if I belonged there anyway. The original chief executive was a different kind of leader. He did not pretend to understand every line of code, but he listened when I explained how the mapping worked. He knew the difference between someone who claimed to build and someone who actually built. He asked me what I needed. I said time and quiet. He gave me both. There is a moment for every engineer when you can feel a system snap into place. After weeks of trial and error, the model finally stopped fighting me. It settled into a graceful pattern where input and output began to speak the same language. I felt that click inside my chest. I wrote it down in my diary that night. There was no one else to see, so I celebrated with cheap sushi from the place that always forgot the ginger. Then came the first small erasures. The commit log showed my name in the early days. Later, the team consolidated branches and my entries were absorbed into a line that said refactor by team. A little thing, not worth an argument. The investor deck used to list me as architect. The next version called me technical contributor. Another little thing. When I asked about it, the answer was a shrug and a sentence that began with "do not worry." I started to worry. When Richard arrived, worry became certainty. He brought with him a new vocabulary meant to sound visionary and ended every meeting with a sentence about growth. He liked stories more than systems. He liked Tyler more than me. It was not about talent. It was about presentation. Tyler was good at standing in front of a screen and making complicated things sound smooth. He was not good at building those things. I do not say that with bitterness. It is simply true. The first time Richard ignored me in a meeting, I felt it like a cold draft. I was explaining a failure mode in the mapping layer, and he cut me off to ask Tyler about user interface colors. Later that day, he sent a note thanking Tyler for moving the project forward. My name was not in the message. It was a small thing. I told myself not to care. I cared. I called my sister that night and told her I felt like I was being erased 1 inch at a time. She said companies change. She said maybe I was reading too much into it. I did not argue. I just decided to start keeping every receipt that could matter. I took screenshots of documents before and after revisions. I tagged my emails. I exported meeting notes where my action items had been quietly reassigned. The folder on my laptop began to grow. I named it ballast because it was the weight that would keep me steady if the water turned rough. The rough water came in a surge. My access to planning meetings was revoked with a vague sentence about focus. A draft pat that used to list me as inventor number 1 was revised to show me as number 3, then number 5, then not at all. Explanations arrived in smiling voices. Legal tidying. Team alignment. Please trust the process. I wanted to trust. Trust is a beautiful thing when it is possible. One night around 3 in the morning, I could not sleep. I made tea and opened the folder with my old contracts. That was the night I found the line that would become the lever under everything. All intellectual property developed using company resources during assigned work hours belongs to Neuralink Solutions. I read the sentence once, then again. Sunlight began to touch the edge of my window before I stopped reading. I called Laura the next day. We had met at a panel about intellectual property in fast-moving industries. She did not know me well, but she had looked me in the eyes after the event and told me to call her if I ever felt boxed in. I did not want to feel like a victim. I wanted to understand the rules. She asked me to come by her office. Laura's office was small and full of boxes. Case files were stacked neatly against the wall. She listened more than she spoke. I handed her a drive with logs and videos and drafts and bills. I explained everything I had built before I ever had a badge. She asked clear questions. When we finished, she tapped a folder with her finger and smiled a slow, sharp smile. "They are following a classic playbook," she said. "Dilute your credit, elevate a mascot, remove the threat. But they left the door open. And you kept your keys. We made a plan, not a movie plan with dramatic music. A clean plan." I incorporated Athene's labs quietly and assigned to it the work I had created on my own time with my own equipment. We filed provisional patents that traced an exact line through dates and development logs. I bought a separate domain. I built a small landing page that said almost nothing. Then I focused on the part of the plan that made me feel both proud and sad. The documentation trap. The trap began with a real need. The project needed a full technical specification to keep government contracts compliant. I volunteered to write it. That part was not hard. I had been writing specs since my first internship. The trick was not the content. The trick was the placement. The document had to be dense enough to bore executives and precise enough to pass legal review. It had to be a forest where the right tree could hide in plain sight. I began with requirements. Pages of them. System requirements. Security requirements. Deployment requirements. I wrote about data provenance and model drift and test coverage and throughput. Then I added diagrams, network topologies that would make a professor pause, flowcharts that looked like modern art if you squinted. I included a table of licensing considerations for open source components with 3 separate appendices. I made sure every section referenced another section in ways that felt natural but created a maze. In Section 6, I wrote about intellectual property considerations. I used the most boring tone I could manage. I referenced clauses and compliance checklists and cited external frameworks. I surrounded the heart of the trap with paragraphs so dry they could have been used to absorb spills. In the middle of that, I wrote a single sentence that had nothing to do with open source. It acknowledged that the core algorithmic foundation developed by me prior to full employment remained my intellectual property and was licensed to Neuralink under terms to be renegotiated. I used plain words. I did not try to sound clever. I did not bold anything. I did not draw attention. I trusted their habits. I trusted their hunger to sign and go to dinner. When the document was finished, it was 200 pages of careful boredom. I printed 6 copies because signatures on paper are harder to deny than digital initials. I scheduled the meeting for late on a Friday. People are distracted on Fridays. They are thinking of dinners and children and the train. I remember that meeting with a clarity that surprises me. Tyler arrived first and scrolled his phone without greeting me. Richard entered with his earpiece still in. Samuel looked tired. Marcia carried a pen that matched her lipstick. I put the documents in front of them and began to speak in a voice that sounded like compliance. I walked them through system requirements. No one asked a question. I walked them through database schemas. No one cared. When I said the word government, eyes lifted for a moment out of reflex and then settled back down. Any concerns? I asked. The question floated in the air like a ribbon and then drifted down unnoticed. Margaret from finance signed first. Jason from legal skimmed 2 pages and nodded at a paragraph about third-party dependencies. Smart to paper the trail, he said. I almost laughed. Richard signed last. He did not look at page 172. He did not remember it later. But the ink was on the paper. The date sat beneath his signature. That night, I scanned every page at the highest resolution I could coax from the old office machine. I saved them to 3 separate cloud accounts. I printed extra copies and placed them in a bank box. I mailed one to Laura with tracking. This was not paranoia. This was insurance. It was the adult version of making sure you have enough water before you cross a desert. In the weeks that followed, the company tightened the net around me. My access to deployment keys was reduced. My approvals were routed to committees that never met. I was invited to fewer meetings and then not invited at all. Tyler began presenting to the board. He practiced his confident nod in reflective surfaces and learned how to keep his voice steady when he said the word breakthrough. People clapped. I watched from outside the room and felt like a ghost watching the living pretend they could not see me. I kept working. On company tasks when they were mine to do. On my personal research when the night was mine to hold. I built the monitoring script on a server I paid for myself. It did one thing only. It checked whether my credentials were still valid. If they were valid, it did nothing. If they were not, it pulled a cord that had been woven through everything. It filed patents, sent messages, and told their systems the truth about the licenses they had been using. No server was touched inside their walls. No forbidden doors were opened. I did not need to breach anything. The truth is the cleanest switch. From the window now, I could see Samuel again in the lobby, arguing with someone I did not recognize. His gestures looked sharp and desperate. He had to be thinking about the Department of Defense demo scheduled for next week. He had to be thinking about the investors flying in for a tour. He had to be thinking about the fate of his team. I felt no joy in his panic. Samuel had once stood up for me when a manager tried to take my role in a public announcement. He had tried. He had also stopped trying. People learn to survive in different ways. My phone chimed with a new email. It was from a woman named Sarah who wrote for a technology publication. She wanted to confirm a rumor that Neuralink might be facing a licensing issue with its core algorithms. I did not respond yet. Timing mattered. I forwarded the note to Laura and returned my attention to the building. I thought of Tyler then, not with anger, with a kind of sad recognition. He was good at taking cues. He was good at fitting into the shape of a story someone else had crafted. When a room rewarded bluster, he learned bluster. When a room rewarded silence, he learned silence. People like that look like thieves, but most of the time they are mirrors. He had mirrored what Richard wanted. He had mirrored what a board wanted. Now he would try to mirror what I wanted. That would not work. I let the next memory unspool. It was of a long hallway and a poster on the wall that said "Move fast and be bold." The hallway smelled like bleach from a recent cleaning. Richard had just announced a new initiative that turned out to be a rebranding of the old initiative. He always added the word "new" to things that already existed. In that meeting, I had raised a question about data retention. He had smiled and told me to think big. I remember thinking that the people who like to say "think big" are often asking you to ignore a small, crucial detail. The small, crucial details are where systems break or hold. Perhaps that was why the documentation trap felt fair. It was a small detail that held. I did not mislead anyone. I did not pretend the sentence was something else. I put it where it belonged and they ignored it. You cannot claim the sky tricked you because you did not look up. The cafe door opened and a gust of warm air swirled past my table. A man with a briefcase took the seat behind me and asked for a double espresso. He tapped his foot as he waited, impatient even in relaxation. I listened to the barista tamp grounds and steam milk, the comfortable percussion of normal life. Across the street, nothing looked normal at all. On my screen, the pat confirmations continued to arrive. The subject lines lined up in a column like a roll call. I opened one at random and read the lines that mattered. Application received. Timestamp recorded. Priority date established. It felt like hearing a gavel, not the gavel of punishment, the gavel of recognition. I allowed myself to imagine one more scene in my head. It was the scene that would come later today or tomorrow morning. A boardroom where Richard tried to explain how a single signature had created a license he could not break. Faces around the table would tighten. Voices would rise. Someone would suggest lawyers. Someone would suggest engineers. Someone would wonder aloud if it might be cheaper to rebuild from scratch. That person would not be an engineer. I thought of my team. The ones who had learned the codebase layer by layer with me. The ones who would look at a rebuild and know the truth. You cannot rebuild in a week what took years to grow. The tuning alone is 1,000 small choices that no one wrote down because they were felt rather than measured. I had written down as much as anyone ever could, but even my notes could not compress experience into a checklist. If they decided to rebuild to avoid paying me, they would discover the cost of pride. I finished my cortado and ordered water. I wanted my mind to stay sharp. The emails I would write this afternoon would shape the next part of my life. Every reply had to be calm and factual. Every invitation to talk had to be clear that I was open to partnerships built on respect. I would not gloat. Gloating is for people who are not sure they have actually won. I was sure. I had not beaten them. I had protected myself, and they had walked into the protection because their habits guided them there. A memory tugged at me then, the moment after the Friday signature meeting when I stood by the window at sunset and watched the city turn gold. I remember placing my hand flat against the glass and promising myself that I would never again allow someone to define my worth by my title. Titles are unstable. Work is not. Integrity is not. Proof is not. My phone vibrated with a call. The name on the screen was Richard. I let it ring until it stopped. A moment later, it vibrated again. This time it was Jason from legal. I let that ring as well. I was not being dramatic. I was giving them time to read page 172. A real conversation would only be possible after that. I opened my laptop and logged into the Athenes Labs dashboard. The front page was simple by design. A clean list of technology families with concise descriptions. Licensing terms written in plain English. A contact form that routed to an inbox that Laura and I both monitored. It was not flashy. It was not trying to be a show. It existed to begin honest negotiations. The truth does not need a spotlight. It creates its own. Across the street, a new cluster of people filled the lobby. Some of them I knew. Some of them I had never seen. One wore a badge from a consulting firm that charged by the hour to tell executives what their engineers had told them for free. The irony did not sting the way it used to. I felt strangely calm. I had my work. I had my copies. I had a company with my name on the door. I closed my eyes and let one more flashback rise. It was from a quiet Sunday when I printed the document with the key sentence and carried it to the bank. The clerk with the neat haircut did not know what she was stamping. She smiled and asked me to sign here and here and here. The vault smelled like metal and paper and a trace of something sweet I could not place. I remember thinking that the space felt gentle, even though it held the evidence for battles I hoped I would never have to fight. The door of the cafe opened again. The same gust of warm city air touched my face. I looked up, and saw my reflection in the window layered over the building across the street. For a second, it looked like I was standing inside that lobby again. Then the image shifted and I saw myself where I truly was, on my side of the glass, on my side of the story. Another email arrived from a venture fund that specialized in deep technology. They wanted to schedule a call for the afternoon. I typed a measured reply. "Thank you for reaching out. I am available at 4. Please confirm." I paused before hitting send and read the sentence about 3 times, then I clicked. The page of my notebook that had been blank was no longer blank. Without noticing, I had written a single line in small letters. The line said this: "Power lives where you put your attention." I put my attention back on the tower and watched as a courier rushed through the revolving doors with a package held tight against his ribs. I wondered if it was a letter from legal. I wondered if inside that letter was anger or apology. I wondered if the apology would come from the people who owed it or from people paid to deliver it. I did not wonder long. The outcome did not depend on their tone. It depended on signatures, and the signatures already existed. As the second hour of the cascade began, I felt a quiet within myself that I had not felt in months. It spread through me like cool water. I let it settle. Then I opened a new document and began to write the first internal memo for Athenes Labs. The title was simple: Principles. The first line said that we would attribute our people correctly, in public and in private, on paper and in hearts. The second line said that our documents would be read by those who signed them. The third line said that no one would be allowed to erase themselves by looking away. I signed my name at the bottom of the page and saved it. Then I looked up to see a figure in a dark suit push through the cafe door and scan the room with a face I knew too well. Richard spotted me and began to walk in my direction. I did not stand. I did not wave. I did not brace. I set my hands on the table and waited. The documentation would speak first. Then I would. The bell above the cafe door gave a small ring that I had heard 1,000 times, yet this time the sound felt like the first note of a different song. I knew who had come in before I turned my head. Power has a way of announcing itself even when it is shaking. The barista paused with the cloth still in his hand. The student by the window lifted her eyes from her tablet. A couple in the corner lowered their voices as if instinct told them that a private drama was about to cross the floor. Richard scanned the room with quick, hunting glances. He was still the picture of a chief executive at first look. The suit was dark and clean, the shirt crisp, the shoes polished to a quiet shine. But the mask had hairline cracks, a damp line on his collar, a loosened tie that did not look intentional, the faint tremor in the hand that smoothed his jacket as he spotted me by the glass. He walked straight to my table and pulled out the chair without asking. That was his habit. He did not ask. He claimed space and called it leadership. The chair legs scraped across the wooden floor with a sound that drew 1 or 2 more eyes in our direction. He leaned forward and placed both hands on the table as if his palms could pin the moment down. "Kylie," he said. The tone tried to be calm but could not hide the wire of anger running through it. "What have you done?" I let the question sit between us. I could feel my own pulse, steady and slow, not from coldness but from practice. I had rehearsed the posture of calm for months, like a pianist practicing scales until muscle memory took the place of fear. I set my glass of water down and folded my hands. "I started a company," I said. "I filed patents. I sent a few emails, you know. The usual things people do when their badge stops working. Do not play with me," he snapped. "The engineer floor is lit up with alerts. The build pipeline is stuck. The duty demo is in 6 days. Investors are calling every minute. This is on you. This is sabotage." There was a tremor in his voice that I had never heard in the boardroom. In there he had a stage and an audience, a slide deck and applause. Here he had me and the reflection of his own choices. I watched him for a heartbeat longer, then answered with a tone as level as the blue line on a healthy monitor. "Sabotage would mean I touched your systems," I said. "I did not. I reclaimed the license for work that is mine. You acknowledged that in writing. Page 172, Section 6, Paragraph 3. If you like, I can quote it to you from memory." The change on his face was small but clear. A tiny flinch around the eyes, a muscle along his jaw that jumped and went still again. He remembered the Friday afternoon when he signed a document he did not read. He remembered the words that had looked like routine and were in fact a hinge. "You tricked us," he said, softer now, as if the accusation might turn into an excuse if he lowered the volume. "No," I said. "I documented the truth. You chose not to look. If you are standing on a platform and you refuse to read the sign that says weight limit, you do not get to claim betrayal when the boards give way." His phone lit up on the table. A name in bold letters flashed and vanished when he hit decline. I saw the name because he did not angle the screen away. David Park, the investor whose opinion could make a quarter bloom or wither. Richard pressed his lips together as if to seal in a curse. "What do you want?" he asked. The words sounded like gravel in his mouth. "Money, public apology, control." "Nothing," I said, and I meant it. "I already have what I want. My name attached to my work. My company standing on its own. My future in my hands. The only decision left is yours. License the technology from Athene's labs or try to rebuild without it. I wish you good luck if you choose the second path. I think you know what that road looks like." 25% of gross revenue, he said, almost spitting the number. "That is not a term, that is a ransom." "It is a truth written in numbers," I said. "Those algorithms hold up your entire valuation. If you think they do not, then walk away. Tell your board that Tyler can recreate 3 years of neural mapping in 3 weeks. Tell your investors they should enjoy a quiet quarter while you reinvent your core." At the mention of Tyler, he glanced at the door as if expecting the young man to walk in with a miracle under his arm. I could see the memory flicker in his eyes. The pleasant voice, the steady posture, the slides about user experience. I felt no thrill in the image of that confidence hitting a wall of math. I felt only a cool sadness for the team who had not asked to stand in the middle of this. His phone rang again. The sound was sharp in the hum of the cafe. He silenced it with a tap and set the phone face down. The gesture mirrored mine from the termination room, and the symmetry did not escape me. "You think you have won," he said. "I do not think," I said. "I know what has happened and what will happen next." At 8:30 you escorted me out. At 8:47 the first confirmation arrived. "This is not a contest. It is a correction. The system is now stating what has always been true." He sat back a little as if something had pushed against his chest. For the first time a shadow of age crossed his face. He looked like a man who had been running down a hallway and found a locked door where he expected open space. "We need time," he said. "The board needs to review. Legal needs to review. Investors need to hear from me. Give us a day. You have until market open tomorrow," I said. "After that, the calls on my calendar go forward. Google, Microsoft, 2 others I have not decided to name yet. They understand the foundation. They know how to value it. If you do not, that is your choice. You are trying to destroy us," he said, and there was a real hurt in it, as if he had just discovered that the story could cast him as something other than hero. "No," I said. "I am refusing to be erased. If that refusal breaks your story, then the story was fragile to begin with." He stood up. The chair legs scraped again. Heads turned. He straightened his jacket, practiced habit sliding back over panic. For a second I saw the man who could sell a vision in a room full of money. Then the second passed, and I saw a man who had signed what he did not read. "We will be in touch," he said. I reached into my bag and slid a single sheet across the table. My consulting rates. At the bottom, a line that read "Friends and family discount $2,500 per hour." He looked at it for 3 beats, tucked it into his inside pocket, and left without another word. The bell rang again as the door closed behind him. The cafe breathed out. Conversations swelled back to their normal volume. The barista raised his eyebrows at me, a question without a word. I smiled and nodded that I was fine. He nodded back, the small exchange of strangers who have just shared a tense silence and come through it intact. I looked through the window at the glass tower. From this side of the street, it was all sky and sparkle, a clean surface that gave nothing away. Inside, I knew, people I respected were trying to fix what could not be fixed without facing a sentence on a page. My laptop chimed once, then again, like a calm metronome that had turned into a chorus. I drew it closer and opened my inbox. Subject lines arranged themselves like a row of doors waiting for me to choose which to open first. A venture fund whose name would turn heads in any room wanted a call this afternoon. Google proposed a technical review later today. Microsoft sent a short, courteous note that included a draft term sheet in an attachment. A journalist asked for comment. Another journalist did not ask, but sent a list of questions. A former colleague wrote 3 words. "Proud of you." I felt an ache under my ribs that had nothing to do with anger. It was the ache of being seen after being asked to stand in the shadows for too long. I let myself feel it for a breath and then set the feeling gently to the side. There was work to do, and work has always been the place where I find my balance. I replied to the fund first. "Thank you for your interest. I am available at 4. Please confirm." Then to Google. "Happy to walk through the portfolio and answer technical questions." Then to Microsoft. "I have reviewed the outline and I am open to discussing structure. I read each sentence twice before I sent it. Calm is a craft, not a mood. Outside the window, a woman in a gray coat hurried past, talking into her phone with an expression I recognized from release nights. The city kept moving, unaware and indifferent. That indifference felt like a blessing. It meant that my life was not a spectacle. It was just a life, one in which I had finally said a clean no to erasure and a clean yes to the record. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the sounds of the cafe wash over me. The hiss of steam, the grind of beans, a spoon clinking against ceramic, the soft laugh of someone telling the end of a story. I had my own story to finish, and for once, I would write the ending myself. I ordered another water and a small plate of almonds to keep the edge off my hunger. The barista brought them with a quiet smile and asked if I needed anything else. I told him I was good. He glanced at the door as if worried the storm might return and then went back to tamping a new shot. Sunlight moved across the floorboards in patient inches. The cafe was filling, not with tension now, but with routine. I pulled my notebook closer and wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page. What matters is proof. The sentence steadied me. It had steadied me through months when my name slid down documents like a label peeling off a jar. I had proof now in triplicate and more than triplicate. The signatures on the technical spec, the timestamps in the logs, the videos with my sleepy voice narrating a solution at 3 a.m, the live coding sessions in a small forum where people had asked careful questions and I had answered with care. Across the street, a cluster of engineers gathered near the lobby. They were speaking quickly, heads bent toward one another, laptops open and screens glowing like small blue windows. I knew the shape of their worry. I knew the rhythm of a team that still hoped this was a glitch that could be patched if someone clever found the right flag. I wished them clarity and a short path to the truth. The truth would hurt in the short term and free them in the long term. My phone buzzed again. A text from Laura. All confirmations received. Press inquiries already trending. Call me when you want to set boundaries. I sent back a thumbs up and added a line. Market open, deadline delivered. She responded with a check mark and a small lightning bolt. I laughed under my breath. Laura was precise in law and playful in symbols, which made her the best kind of ally for a day like this. I opened the Athens dashboard in a clean browser tab. The page design was simple on purpose. No glossy slogans, no fireworks. A list of technology families with short summaries and clear licensing tiers. A contact form that did not pretend to be a chat, but promised a human reply. I had learned in the last year how much damage a story can do when it floats on style and ignores detail. I wanted the opposite. A foundation anyone could inspect. I clicked into a draft of a public statement and read it again. It said that Athens Labs was founded to develop and license neural mapping technology for ethical applications. It said that our code and research would be documented, that our teams would be credited, that our partners would sign what they read and read what they signed. It was a small manifesto and a practical one. I did not send it yet. I did not want to lead with declarations. I wanted to lead with work. My inbox pinged with a different tone, a message from Samuel. He had never texted me from his personal address before. The preview line was short. We need to talk. I breathed in and out and then I opened it. Kylie, can we speak in an hour? I am not writing for Richard. I am writing for the team and for myself. I am sorry. I should have done more when the edits started. If you will hear me, I would like to talk about a path that does not hurt people who did not choose this fight. I stared at those lines until they blurred. I had imagined this message in different forms over the past months, sometimes with anger and sometimes with grace. The one I received was human. I typed back slowly. I will speak with you at 1. The call will be recorded. I will not discuss anything that undermines my legal position. I will discuss a fair path for engineers who want to work with the original inventor going forward. Thank you, he replied. I could almost hear the relief in the text, which is not a thing people say, and yet is true when words arrive just when a person needs them. I put the phone face down again and looked outside. The glass tower flashed the sky back at the sun. It was beautiful. It had always been beautiful. The beauty had once felt like a promise to me. Now it felt like a reflection with nothing behind it that had not been placed there by hands like mine and minds like mine. That realization did not make me bitter. It made me sober. The couple in the corner stood to leave, pushing back their chairs gently. The woman glanced at me as they passed and gave a small nod that carried more than politeness. I nodded back. I did not know if she had heard any part of the conversation with Richard or if she just recognized the look of someone who has walked through a difficult door and come out on the other side. Recognition does not always need context. Sometimes it just needs empathy. I returned to my replies. I set a short call with the journalist from TechCrunch, not to spill, but to set facts in place. I agreed to a technical deep dive with the Google team. I told Microsoft that I would propose a framework by evening. As I wrote, I felt a clean focus that I had not felt inside Neuralink for a long time. The weight of pretending was gone. The room inside my head that had been crowded with doubt was now open and full of air. At 12:30, my cortado arrived because the barista remembered my habit before I had even asked. He set it down and said, "On the house," with a smile that made room for dignity. I thanked him and lifted the small glass. The drink was balanced and bright. I took a slow sip and watched a courier rush into the tower with a thick envelope clutched to his chest. I guessed it would end up in legal. I wondered if anyone in that department had made a map of how their own signatures had brought them here. My phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. Another rang. I let that one go too. I was not avoiding. I was prioritizing. I chose the calls that respected the work and the people who did it. At 1 on the dot, Samuel called. I answered and placed my phone flat on the table on speaker with the recorder on. He apologized. Not a corporate apology. A quiet one. He said he had watched my name slide off documents and had told himself he was protecting his team by swallowing his objections. He said swallowing had not protected anyone and that he knew that now. He asked if there was a path for some of the team to join Athenes without making their lives into a battlefield. There is, I said, but it will be a path you walk with clear eyes. No one should jump from fear. They should walk for respect. We will not poach. We will open the door and people can choose. He exhaled and said thank you, and I said you are welcome, and we ended the call. I sat for a minute after that with my palms flat on the wood, feeling the grain under my skin. The day was turning, and I could feel it in my bones, the way sailors feel wind change without looking at flags. I opened the draft licensing document for Neuralink and read it again. 25% of gross revenue for enterprise use, attribution of origin in all materials, retroactive to the morning of termination, non-disparagement removed. Clean terms, strong terms, not cruel. I had no interest in making a bonfire. I wanted a ledger that matched the truth. My phone buzzed with a new email. Richard. Subject line, proposal. I did not open it yet. I wrote one more reply to an investor who had backed my earliest experiments with a small check and a large belief. Thank you for seeing me when all I had was a notebook and an overworked laptop. He wrote back within a minute. I always did. I breathed in the smell of coffee and baked sugar and city dust and Manhattan summer. The cafe door swung open to let in a fresh group of people, and for a moment the sunlight framed them like a stage light. I realized I had been sitting here for hours, and yet it felt like 10 minutes. Time had been doing that all day, stretching and snapping like a rubber band. I smiled at the thought and turned back to my screen. I opened Richard's email. It was shorter than I expected. He wrote that the board had called an emergency session. He wrote that legal had reviewed the technical spec and that the relevant sentence was indeed binding. He wrote that they would like to meet at 4 to discuss a counter-proposal. He tried to sound firm and failed in the second line where the voice shifted from demand to request. I wrote back, 4:30 at my office, 30 minutes. Bring Jason from legal and one person from engineering leadership. Leave Tyler out of the room. There was a long pause before he replied. Agreed. I looked at the address block in my signature and felt a small jolt of pleasure at its clean lines. Athenes Labs, the suite number, the street, the city. I had signed that lease 3 months ago with hands that shook a little. Not from fear, not exactly. From the feeling of stepping into a life I could not fully see yet. The small office had a view of the river and a plant I had not killed and a table that could seat 8. It would be enough. At 2, I took the journalist call. I spoke like an engineer and not like a character in a scandal. I said what was documented and refused to dramatize what did not need dramatizing. The questions were sharp but fair. At the end, the journalist said thank you for your time, and I said thank you for your accuracy. I meant it. Accuracy is a form of respect. At 3, I walked to the office to set the room. I did not want the meeting with Neuralink to happen in the cafe where the smell of coffee might soften my edges, or in their tower where walls might try to carry old power into new air. I wanted it in a space where the table knew my name. The building lobby was quiet, the elevator smooth, the hallway freshly vacuumed. I unlocked the door and let the room greet me. The office was small, but it breathed. White walls, a dark table, 2 framed prints of old circuits I loved, a whiteboard that still carried the ghost of yesterday's notes. I opened the windows to let in the late afternoon warmth and watered the plant by the corner. The act grounded me more than I expected. I set out 3 bottles of water and 3 glasses. I arranged a printed copy of the licensing terms at each seat and placed a pen beside each paper. The neat ritual of preparation steadied my hands. I checked the recorder batteries. I checked the document versions. I checked the calendar invites. Precision is a kindness you give your future self. At 4:27, the intercom buzzed. The front desk announced visitors. I said, "Send them up." I stood for a moment by the window and watched the river carry a boat under the bridge, a small white triangle of wake spreading behind it in a modest fan. Then 3 footsteps sounded in the hall, the cadence of dress shoes on clean tile. A knock. I opened the door. Richard entered first, then Jason, then Samuel. They looked as if the day had pressed on them from all directions. Richard carried the clipped energy of a man trying to hold his story together. Jason had a folder tucked under his arm and a face that had moved from confidence to caution. Samuel looked at me and did not look away. "Welcome," I said. "Please take a seat. This meeting will be recorded." They sat. I began the recording and stated the date and time. Then I slid the licensing document across the table. "This is our proposal," I said. "It is not a threat and it is not an opening bid. It is the price of truth. 25% of gross revenue for enterprise use, attribution of origin in all materials, retroactive to this morning. In return, your licenses will be valid, your pipeline will resume, your demo will proceed, and your board will receive a clean explanation they can repeat without breaking a sweat." Jason opened his folder and pulled out a sheet. "We have a counter," he said, aiming for a tone that sounded like a game. 5% with a cap and a confidentiality clause. "No cap," I said. "No clause that silences the record. The story is not for sale. The technology is for license." Richard spoke for the first time since sitting down. "This will crush our margins." "No," I said, "it will correct them. You have been enjoying the cheap price of someone else's work for a long time. This adjusts your map to match the land." Samuel leaned forward. "What happens if we accept?" I smiled a little. "Then the system breathes again. You will push fixes. Your team will sleep tonight. Your 2D demo will happen. Your investors will remove their hands from their hair and put them back on their keyboards." Jason glanced at Richard. He tapped the pen against the margin of the contract without realizing. He cleared his throat. "We need the board to approve. Can we have until tomorrow morning?" "Mark it open," I said. "That is your window. After that, my conversations will shape a future that does not include your balance sheet." Richard stared at the table for a long heartbeat. Then he lifted his head and met my eyes. He looked like a man who had been sure he could win any stare and was discovering that some stares were not contests. They were simply mirrors. "We will revert by morning," he said. I nodded. Then I slid a second page across the table. "A letter confirming that I am the inventor of record for the core algorithms. You will sign this now." Jason hesitated. Richard reached for the pen. His signature was smaller than the one I had watched glide across the technical spec months ago. He signed and slid the page back. I placed it in a clear folder and set it to my left. I did not feel triumph. I felt alignment. We stood. I walked them to the door. Samuel paused before stepping into the hall. "For what it is worth," he said, "I am sorry. I should have done more." "You should have," I said, and my voice was not cruel. Then we both nodded as people who have told the truth to each other and can now walk on. The door closed. I stood in the quiet office and let my breath out in one long line. The recorder light glowed a small red dot. The plant in the corner looked greener than it had an hour ago. Maybe that was light. Maybe it was my eyes. I sat and began to write the internal memo for Athenes Labs that I had drafted in the cafe. It was titled Principles, and it was not long. We attribute correctly. We sign what we read. We put engineers at tables where decisions are made. We do not trade honesty for speed. We do not make myths out of other people's labor. I added one more line. We keep receipts, not because we expect betrayal, but because we respect memory. I signed my name and saved the file. The river moved on outside my window, carrying its small silver paths of reflected sun. The office grew quiet after Richard and his entourage left. Their footsteps faded down the hall, the elevator chimed once, and then the building returned to its late afternoon calm. The only sound in my suite was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of the clock on the wall. For the first time in hours, I was alone. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The weight of the day pressed against me, not as panic, not as exhaustion, but as a steady gravity. I had pulled the lever I had built for months and the world had shifted. The glass tower across the street was shaking. Athenes Labs was standing. I opened my laptop. The inbox was a flood. Subject lines marched down the screen like headlines in a ticker tape parade. Term sheet attached. Urgent call requested. Interested in partnership. Exclusive interview request. Every line pulsed with urgency. If I answered them all at once, I would drown. I reminded myself of the rule Laura had drilled into me. Urgency belongs to them, not to you. I created folders. One for investors, one for journalists, one for partners, one for noise. Then I dragged each message into its place. The act of sorting slowed my breathing. Order is a form of power. The investor folder was already overflowing. Some of the names were familiar, people who had watched Neuralink rise and wanted a piece of the next ascent. Others were new, funds that specialized in buying stakes in companies during moments of upheaval. They smelled blood in the water and wanted to call it opportunity. I opened one at random. It was from a fund in California with a reputation for aggressive terms. They wanted a call within the hour. They proposed a valuation of $100 million for 20% equity. They attached a flashy deck with charts and buzzwords. I closed it without replying. It was bait, not respect. The next message was from an angel investor who had once written me a small personal check when all I had was a notebook and a dream. His email was short. I knew you were the real one, proud to see the world catching up. I smiled at the words and starred the message so it would never be lost in the flood. In the partners folder, messages from Google and Microsoft sat at the top. Both were formal, both offered structured calls with their technical leads. Both treated me as an equal. That mattered more than the numbers in the term sheets. Respect was the currency I valued most now. The journalist folder was full of curiosity and speculation. I skimmed a few subject lines. Rumors of a coup, questions about sabotage. The word betrayal appeared more than once. I closed the folder. I would not let strangers define the story with their hunger for drama. I would define it myself when the time was right. As I sorted, my phone vibrated. A call from Laura. I answered. "Congratulations," she said, her voice crisp. "The board just called me. They know the trap is real. They know the sentence holds. They will bend by morning." "I do not want their collapse," I said. "I want their correction." "And you will get it," she replied. "But remember, correction is painful for people who built their comfort on denial. They will claw. Be steady." "I am steady," I said, and realized it was true. "Good, then let us talk about the wave of offers. I can already see the outlines. Some want to own you, some want to muzzle you. A few want to actually build with you. Your job is to know which is which." I laughed softly. "So nothing new, just louder." "Exactly," she said. "I will filter the noise, focus on the work." Focus on Athenes Labs. We ended the call. I felt the silence settle again, but it was not heavy. It was clean. I opened a new document and wrote the title, Athenes Labs First Principles. Beneath it, I began to type. "We will attribute our engineers. We will document what we sign. We will negotiate in daylight. We will not build illusions. We will license truth." Each line felt like a stone laid in the foundation of a house. Across the river, the city lights began to flicker on. The day was ending, but mine was not. My day had only just started. The light outside my office windows shifted from the warm glow of late afternoon into the softer grays of evening. Cars along the river blurred into streams of red and white, headlights weaving patterns I had watched many nights before but never from this vantage point. Tonight the view felt different. The world looked the same, yet my place in it had changed. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. I let it ring until voicemail picked up. A moment later, a text arrived from the same contact. "We represent a strategic investment group. We can wire capital tonight if you agree to a call now." I laughed quietly, a sharp sound in the empty office. They wanted to buy certainty in an hour that held no certainty. That was not how I intended to build Athenes Labs. I ignored the message and opened another window on my laptop. A video call invite from Google's research lead. The message was simple: "Respect your work deeply. Would like to discuss collaboration on adaptive neural mapping. Tomorrow morning if possible." I flagged it high priority. That was the kind of conversation I wanted. Not flash, not panic, but respect. The Microsoft message followed a similar rhythm. Formal, concise, professional. They attached a draft licensing agreement, the kind that had clearly been prepared long before today, as if they had anticipated this storm. I wondered briefly how long they had been watching Neuralink unravel from the inside. Then I pushed the thought aside. It did not matter. What mattered was that they had addressed me directly. Not as an accessory, not as a footnote, but as the rightful owner. I began to reply when another notification pulled my eyes. Social media was lighting up. A trending tag carried my name. Rumors bloomed like weeds. Some called me a thief, some called me a hero, some debated whether the technology was even real. I scrolled for less than a minute before I closed the window. The noise would not help me tonight. My focus belonged to the work. I stood and stretched, my body reminding me that I had been sitting for hours. My shoulders ached. My eyes burned slightly from the glow of the screen. I crossed the room to the small kitchenette and filled a glass of water. The plant in the corner caught my eye again. Its leaves seemed stronger under the lamplight. I touched one gently and felt its firmness. Survival was not always glamorous, but it was proof. When I returned to the table, my phone lit up once more. This time the name on the screen was one I recognized instantly. Samuel. I hesitated, then answered. Kylie, his voice came through, tired but steady. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I wanted to say thank you for not burning everything down. The team is shaken. They feel like the ground has shifted under their feet. The ground has shifted, I said softly. But it was already unstable. Now at least it is honest, he sighed. I cannot defend what happened. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. That is on me. But if some of the team wanted to join you, would you consider it? I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. I would consider it, but not out of anger. They need to want to work with me, not against you. I will not recruit through bitterness. If they choose Athene's Labs, it will be because they believe in what we build. That sounds like you, he said. Fair, even when you do not have to be. We ended the call. I set the phone down and let the words settle. Fairness was not weakness. Fairness was the strongest ground I could stand on. I looked again at my notes for Athene's Labs, first principles. I added a line beneath the others. We invite, we do not coerce. We open the door, we do not push. The clock ticked past 7. My inbox still overflowed. My phone still buzzed. But for the first time in months, I felt that the noise around me was not erasure. It was recognition. The world was loud because it had finally noticed what had been mine all along. By 8 o'clock, the office was quiet except for the low hum of my laptop. The inbox still pulsed. The notifications still rolled in, but I decided to pause. I closed the lid gently and let the room breathe with me. The city outside was glowing now, the river reflecting long trails of light from bridges and towers. Somewhere across that river, Neuralink's headquarters still stood tall and silent, but inside I knew the panic continued. I poured myself another glass of water and walked slowly around the office, letting my eyes rest on the details of this space I had chosen months ago. The prints on the wall, the whiteboard with faint marks from an earlier sketch. The plant that was alive simply because I had remembered to care for it. This was not yet a grand headquarters. It was small. Modest. But it was mine. My phone buzzed again. This time it was not an investor, not a journalist, not even a partner. It was a message from a young engineer I had once mentored. If you are building something new, I want in. Neuralink feels hollow without you. I felt warmth in my chest. I typed back carefully. Athene's Labs will open its doors soon. We will work in daylight. If that is what you want, you will be welcome. I realized then that I needed to do more than reply to messages one by one. I needed to craft a vision for those who might join me. I sat again at the table, opened my notebook, and began to write, not a manifesto for the world. A note for the team I would someday lead. I wrote about clarity, about giving credit, about building without fear. I wrote that we would treat every engineer as a voice, not a tool. That mistakes would be documented, not hidden. That victories would be shared, not hoarded. As the words filled the page, I felt the shape of something solid forming. Athene's Labs was no longer just my defense. It was becoming a community waiting to be born. At 9 o'clock, Laura called again. Her tone was brisk but lighter than earlier. The board has confirmed they will meet first thing in the morning. They know the 25% is the only path. They are cornered and they know it. I do not want to gloat, I said. I only want them to sign and step aside. That is wise, she replied. But Kylie, you should also prepare for what comes after. Once this licensing deal is in place, you will have resources. Investors will circle harder. Engineers will flock to you. You will need structure. Draft it now before the tide hits. I am already writing it, I said, glancing at my notebook. First principles, a simple framework, something we can grow around. Laura's voice softened. That is why you will succeed. Most people fight for revenge. You are building for continuity. When the call ended, I leaned back in my chair and let the quiet settle again. The glow of the city outside felt less intimidating now. It felt like possibility. I imagined the first meeting of Athene's Labs. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. A handful of people gathered in this room, their laptops open, their eyes bright with the energy of building something clean. We would not have glossy slides or marketing slogans. We would have code and trust and a table that could hold both. I closed my eyes and saw it clearly. A future not built on erasure, but on recognition. A company not defined by the theft of names, but by the care of them. At 10 o'clock, I locked the office and stepped into the night. The air was warm, the streets alive with people heading to dinners, bars, and homes. I blended into the crowd, just another figure walking under the city lights. No one knew that inside my bag were the signed acknowledgments, the patents, the contracts that had shifted the balance of an entire industry. No one knew, and that was fine. The city did not need to know. It was enough that I knew. As I crossed the bridge, I glanced back once at the Neuralink tower. Its lights glittered against the sky, but glitter is not substance. Tomorrow, the market would open and the truth would be priced. I reached my apartment a little after 11. The hallway was quiet, the neighbors already gone to bed or sunk into their own late-night routines. Inside, the air smelled faintly of books and lavender, a small comfort I had built for myself. I dropped my bag on the chair by the door and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook once again. The day was not finished until the plan was written. I flipped to a clean page and drew a simple table with 3 columns: morning, afternoon, evening. Under each, I began to write. Morning, confirm licensing terms with Neuralink board, call with Google research team, draft statement of principles for new hires. Afternoon, meeting with Microsoft legal, call with Laura to finalize protection clauses. Reach out to angel investors who had supported me early. Evening, draft website updates, prepare a message to engineers who had contacted me directly. Outline first team meeting for Athenes Labs. The act of writing steadied me. It turned the flood into a sequence. I could feel the tension of the day dissolving into clarity. I closed my eyes for a moment and let myself imagine tomorrow evening. I would sit again at this table, not with the weight of anticipation, but with the clean record of progress. The signatures would be on paper. The licenses would be confirmed. The name of Athenes Labs would be spoken in meetings where my name had once been erased. My phone buzzed with one last message before midnight. It was from the young engineer again. Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for showing us it is possible to stand up for your work. I read the line twice and felt something stir in me that was gentler than victory. It was belonging. I placed the notebook and pen neatly on the table, turned off the light, and walked to my bedroom. The city hummed outside my window, endless and alive, but for once I did not feel drowned in its noise. I felt carried by it. As I slipped beneath the sheets, I whispered the same sentence I had written earlier in the cafe. What matters is proof. Then I let the darkness take me. Tomorrow would come fast, but I was ready. The sun rose earlier than I wanted, spilling pale gold across my bedroom walls before I was ready to leave sleep behind. But my mind was awake before my body. The moment I opened my eyes, the words returned, market open. The clock on the nightstand showed 6:45. In 2 hours, the exchanges would ring their bells and Neuralink would face the truth on paper. I dressed simply, jeans and a clean white shirt, and brewed a cup of coffee strong enough to match the weight of the day. As I drank, I scrolled through my phone. News headlines were everywhere. Neuralink in crisis. Inventor fights back. Who owns the future of neural mapping? Photos of Richard looking grim as he left the tower filled my feed. Analysts speculated about plunging valuations. Some called me reckless. Some called me a genius. All of them spelled my name correctly. That alone felt like a victory. At 7:30, I left the apartment and walked briskly through streets already buzzing with commuters. The air carried the scent of fresh bagels and diesel buses, the morning symphony of a city that had no time to pause. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Laura. "They are signing," she said without preamble. "The board met at 7. The vote was unanimous. They will agree to the 25% gross revenue licensing. The acknowledgement of inventorship is already on its way to your inbox." I stopped on the sidewalk and closed my eyes, letting the words settle. "It is done then." "It is done," she confirmed. "But remember, this is not an end. It is a beginning. They will spin, the press will twist, competitors will scramble. Stay steady. Let the proof speak." "I will," I said, and I meant it. By 8 o'clock, I was in my office. The inbox was already stacked high with replies, but I ignored them for the moment. I opened the new attachment Laura had mentioned. A single-page document signed by every board member. We acknowledge that the algorithms known as the Atlas Framework were conceived and authored by Kylie Kelly, and we affirm her inventorship as documented. I traced the letters with my eyes until they blurred. The signatures below looked heavy, the ink pressed into the paper as if the pens had fought against the truth before surrendering. I printed the document and set it in a frame on the wall. Not as a trophy, but as a receipt. At 9, the market opened. I watched the ticker on my screen. Neuralink shares dropped 20% within minutes. Analysts called it a correction, not a collapse. But everyone knew what had happened. The truth had been priced. I turned off the ticker. My focus belonged not to their fall, but to my rise. A knock at the door pulled me back. When I opened it, Samuel stood there, shoulders squared, eyes tired but steady. Behind him were two engineers I recognized from the old office. They looked nervous but hopeful. "Morning," Samuel said. "We wanted to talk about joining you." I stepped aside and let them in. The small office suddenly felt alive with new energy. They carried laptops, notebooks, the tools of people ready to work. One of them, a young woman named Priya, smiled shyly. "We believe in what you are building," she said. I gestured toward the table. "Then let us begin." Samuel set his laptop on the table and sat with his hands folded as if he were asking permission to speak in a classroom. Priya took the seat to my left, a neat notebook already open, a pen aligned along its spine. The third engineer, Marcus, hovered by the whiteboard for a second before choosing the chair closest to the window. They were all carrying the look I recognized from release nights. Eyes bright, shoulders tight, minds running ahead of their mouths. I clicked the recorder on my phone and placed it in the center of the table. Not because I did not trust them, but because I wanted our first words to be words we could return to. I had learned the hard way that memory is faithful only when it is given help. "Welcome to Athenes Labs," I said. "This is not an interview and not a ritual. This is a beginning." Samuel nodded once. "Understood." "Ground rules," I continued. "We attribute work precisely. We sign what we read. We speak disagreements in the room and write decisions down before we leave it. We do not sell a story that the code cannot carry. We refuse to hide mistakes. We treat every change as a hypothesis and every result as a report. If any of that feels like a costume, now is the moment to say so." No one moved. Priya wrote the rules in her notebook like lines of a promise. Marcus leaned forward. "Feels like air," he said simply. "Good," I said. "Then here is the first hour of our company." I drew a simple map on the whiteboard. 3 columns: core, licensing, ethics. "In core," I said, tapping the first column, "we stabilize Atlas under our own governance. That means version control that belongs to us, tests that we choose, release cadence that is honest. We will not promise anything to any partner that we cannot run on a clean machine by noon the next day. Priya, I want you to lead our test architecture. Build the suite you always wished you had." Her eyes lit. "End-to-end across 3 representative datasets, nightly reports, and a visible health dashboard." "Exactly," I said. "Make the dashboard in plain language. Green means we sleep. Yellow means we prepare. Red means we stop and fix it before we speak to anyone." I tapped the second column. "In licensing, we make the truth easy to buy. Clear tiers, clear boundaries, a small starter license for research labs, an enterprise license with the 25% that Neuralink just accepted, and an education license for programs that will train the next generation to push us past our own limits. Marcus, you will be product for this stream. Draft the terms in plain English and then in legal. If the English and the legal do not say the same thing, we rewrite both." Marcus grinned. "I always wanted to see that sentence in a real company." "Get used to it," I said, and drew a line under the third column. "In ethics, we put our alarms where everyone can see them. We document what the system cannot do and what it should not do. We refuse ambiguous deployments. We set a requirement that any clinical or defense use must pass an abuse review with a named signer who is not financially rewarded for approval. Samuel, you own this with me. Neither of us signs alone." Samuel looked relieved, as if a burden he had carried in silence finally had a place to rest. "I will do it," he said. I wrote the day's objectives on the board. Spin new repository. Migrate clean history. Install health dashboard. Draft license pages. Draft ethics template. Then I drew a box around one more line. Team meeting at 5. We will read these rules aloud and sign them. "Questions," I said. Priya raised her hand halfway, then dropped it at my smile. "We will need cloud credits and a secure bucket, also a space for public documentation." "Done," I said. "I will call our contacts this afternoon and have the credits by evening." For public docs, you can start with the minimal site on our current domain. No fancy design, words first. Clarity is our design. Marcus glanced at Samuel. "What about compensation? What about shares?" I had expected this and wanted it to be clear from the start. "We will pay fair salaries from day one. We will make offers this week with equity that vests cleanly. No traps, no clause. I will share the cap table with the team once it is final, not as gossip but as structure. If we cannot say the numbers aloud, the numbers are wrong." They sat with that for a beat. People always say they want transparency, then they see it and have to learn how to stand in its light. I watched their faces and saw acceptance, then commitment. All right, I said. Open your laptops. Create the Athens org. Priya, choose the initial structure. Marcus, draft the first README. Samuel, write the ethics preface. I will finalize the Neuralink signature and call Google at 10:30. Keys began to click. The quiet was not empty. It was full of intent. While they worked, I pulled up my call with the Google research team. They came on screen with cameras on and smiles that were not corporate smiles. The lead introduced herself as Emily and began with a sentence that disarmed me. I studied your early live streams, she said. I learned a great deal from your mistakes and from your notes about those mistakes. Thank you for leaving them up when most people would have erased them. You are welcome, I said and meant it. The errors taught me faster than the wins. We would like to license Atlas for a specific research environment, Emily continued. No productization in this phase, joint publications possible, attribution explicit. We believe in leading with rigor. Send the details, I said. We will design a research tier this week. It will be generous for work that stays in the light. We set a follow-up for the next morning and ended the call. I took one slow breath. The room was still. At 11, the Microsoft team dialed in. Their style was different, all clean lines and numbered lists. They wanted a pilot with tight service-level objectives and a clear path to a broader license if we met them. I did not overpromise. I told them what our dashboard would say by the end of the week and what we would not attempt until month 2. They seemed relieved to hear boundaries. People are always relieved when confidence arrives wearing accuracy. By noon, the whiteboard had new lines. The health dashboard was alive with placeholder data. The README was a real document, not a skeleton. The ethics preface began with a sentence that made the room go quiet for a moment. Samuel had written, "We serve patients and citizens, not quarterly slides." I underlined it twice. We ate sandwiches at our desks. No toasts. No speeches. Work was our celebration. At 1, my phone buzzed with a message from Laura. The signed licensing agreement had landed. Neuralink had accepted the terms without edits. The acknowledgement letter was already public in a filing. There it was, in a plain document on a plain site, my name attached to my work where anyone could see it. I sent the link to the team. Priya covered her mouth with her hand. Marcus whispered, finally. We did not cheer. We did not need to. We wrote another test and pushed another commit. I paused long enough to hang the framed acknowledgement beside the plant. Not as a shrine. As a promise that we would not need another one like it. Back to work, I said, and the keys began to move again. By mid-afternoon, the office had the gentle disorder of a real lab. Power cords draped like small rivers across the floor. Sticky notes bloomed along the edge of the whiteboard with questions that could not be answered yet. The health dashboard refreshed on a spare monitor with a steady calm that felt like a heartbeat. Green across the board, not because we were lucky. Because we had been honest about scope. I spent the next hour on calls that would have terrified me last month and now felt like a series of conversations with fellow builders. A university research hospital wanted to run a small study under our education license. A robotics lab asked if Atlas could be adapted for a prosthetics interface. I did not pretend to know everything. I asked for time. I asked for sample data. I told them what we would not do until we had a partner with the right oversight and the right safeguards. People responded with respect when they heard that word. Oversight. I decided it would be one of our permanent words. At 3, the first reporter I trusted called. She wanted to confirm a few lines for a story that would run in the evening edition. Her questions were specific. Dates, clauses, who signed when. I answered each one with documents open on my screen. When she asked for a quote about how I felt watching the stock drop, I said, I do not feel about their price, I feel about our proof. She laughed softly and said it would make a terrible headline and a good sentence inside the story. I told her that was all I wanted. Good sentences inside. After the call, Priya came over with her notebook. I want to add failure drills, she said. Once a week. We break something on purpose and write how long it took us to notice and how we knew. We publish that inside the company like a log. I felt pride warm my chest. Write it into our ritual. Friday mornings, 30 minutes. Run the drill. Learn, no blame. Marcus looked up from the license pages. Do we want a public changelog, the kind that shows not only features but also decisions? Yes, I said. Call it the ledger, not just what changed, but why we chose it. Samuel wrote ledger on the board in capital letters. We all stared at the word. It felt right. A ledger is not a billboard. It is a record you keep because you respect time. Near 4, my phone flashed with a new message from Richard. It was short. Implementation complete. Systems unblocked. Thank you. There was no apology, and I had not expected one. Apologies that arrive because someone is cornered are not apologies. They are paperwork. The sentence he sent was enough. It was a receipt from the other side. Laura called seconds later. They wired the first payment, she said. Quarterly in advance as agreed. Their counsel tried to include a line about mutual non-disparagement in the press. I removed it. The facts will stand on their own. Good, I said. Let the facts do the talking. I turned to the team. We will not use their stumble as our advertisement. We will show our work. That is our only campaign. Priya raised her mug. To boring dashboards and loud proofs, she said. We tapped cups and went back to our screens. At 4:30, 2 more engineers arrived, not with fanfare and not with dramatic words. They came because they wanted to write code where the commit messages would not lose their names by morning. I cleared 2 more desks and found 2 more chairs in the storage room. The space felt crowded and perfect. 5 o'clock arrived and I called the room to attention. Team meeting, I said, pointing to the line I had boxed on the board that morning. We circled the table. I read the rules aloud. Then I passed around the page. Each person signed under the last with a pen that felt heavier than a normal pen. Weight is a thing documents can carry when people mean what they say. When the page came back to me, I signed last and dated the bottom. I scanned it and pinned it to the top of our internal site as our first item. No slogans, just the contract we made with one another. We were about to break when the monitor on the wall flashed a new banner. A message from the University Research Hospital had arrived with a small dataset for our education tier. Priya grinned like a kid at a new science kit. I will set up the sandbox, she said. Wait, I said, and everyone paused. Before we begin, 1 minute of silence for the version of us that had to be quiet inside someone else's story. No one spoke. The city hummed outside the windows. The plant in the corner shifted slightly in the air from the vent, as if agreeing. I counted to 20 and then to 40 and then to 60. When the minute ended, we looked at one another and smiled like people who had crossed a narrow bridge and were now standing on the other side, hands still warm from the rope. Back to work, I said again, and the room came alive. Evening came fast and soft. The office lights cast a warm circle over the table while the windows turned into dark mirrors. In those mirrors, I saw a small company with a bright center. I saw a set of rituals forming, not because we were trying to be a culture, but because we were trying to be accurate. Accuracy, I decided, is the only culture that lasts. I stepped into the hallway to take a breath and found a message from my niece waiting on my phone. It was a short video of her holding a cardboard crown. Aunt Kylie, she said, her voice thrilled, I heard you made your own place and the bad guys have to pay rent. I laughed so loudly that a neighbor peeked out of an office door and smiled at me. I sent back a message of my own. I made a place where good people can work with their names on their work, I told her. I will save you a chair. Back inside, I drafted a simple update for our website. It did not mention Neuralink or stock prices or board meetings. It said Athenes Labs is open. It said we are licensing Atlas under 3 clear pathways. It said engineers could apply if they wanted to build in daylight. I read it twice and posted it. Samuel finished the ethics preface and sent it around. We read it silently in our chairs. It was not a lecture. It was a pledge. The last line said, if we cannot defend a use case to a patient in a waiting room or a citizen on a sidewalk, we will not ship it. I felt something hard and good click into place in my chest. At 7, we locked our laptops and walked as a group to the diner on the corner. We took 2 booths and ordered food that tasted better than its price. We did not toast. We did not talk about money. We talked about a bug Priya had once chased for a week that turned out to be a date field parsed in 2 different libraries. We talked about Marcus's first job and the time he had to explain to a vice president why the pretty demo was not a product. We talked about Samuel's first mentor who told him the bravest thing an engineer can say is I do not know yet. We returned to the office to pick up our bags. I lingered by the framed acknowledgement on the wall and thought of the long route that single sheet had taken to arrive here. It had passed through meetings and mistakes and silence and fear, and then into a fax, and then into a folder, and finally into this frame. Documents are journeys. People are journeys too. As the team filtered out, I stayed behind a little longer. The plant needed water. The whiteboard needed a clean space for tomorrow. I erased the top half and left the ledger and the rules intact. Then I wrote a new line at the top. Tomorrow one ship the health dashboard 2 publish the license pages 3 draft the education tier letter 4 schedule the first failure drill. The list was not heroic. It was humble. I felt proud of that. My phone buzzed one last time, an email from Richard. No subject line. Inside were 2 sentences. The demo is back on. We will honor the license and the acknowledgement in all materials. It was not a friendship and it did not need to be. It was the sound of a door closing without a slam. I turned off the lights and stood in the doorway looking at the dark room. The air smelled like dust and paper and a trace of coffee that would still be faint in the morning. I locked the door and walked to the elevator. Outside, the city felt like a tide that had decided to lift rather than pull. The night air was warmer than it had been the night before. I crossed the street and looked back at the row of windows that now included one small square where Athene's labs lived. It was not the tallest. It did not need to be. The work inside would make it shine. On the way home, I passed the cafe where the day had turned. The bell rang as someone else walked in and out. I stopped and looked through the glass at the window seat where I had sat with a glass of water while a company on the other side of the street learned the meaning of a sentence in a long document. The chair was empty now. I whispered thank you to the empty air and kept walking. When I reached my apartment, I set my bag down and opened the notebook on the table. I wrote 3 lines. We chose accuracy over noise. We chose proof over posture. We chose a ledger over a legend. I closed the book and rested my hand on its cover. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more contracts, more code. Some of it would be beautiful. Some of it would be frustrating. All of it would be ours. I turned off the lamp and let the room fall into darkness. The city outside hummed like a confident engine. I lay down and thought of the people who would walk through our door in the weeks ahead, people who wanted to write with their names intact and their sleep unbroken by false alarms. I smiled and closed my eyes. The last thought before sleep was simple and bright. We are finally building.